We continue now at the top of Daf Zayin Amud Aleph in Meseches Rosh Hashana. This is Rosh Hashana Daf 27a. The Gemara quotes the Mishnah over here, Upiv Mitzup Ezov. It said that in the Beis HaMikdash, when they blew the shofar, the mouth of the shofar, it was plated with gold. So the Gemara says, Vatanya, but we learned in a brayso, so the opposite. Sipo Zov b'makom hanachas piv pasul. That if you plate it with gold in the area where you're supposed to place your mouth to blow the shofar, that shofar is pasul. And shelo b'makom hanachas piv kosher. But if it's plated with gold in an area where you're not placing your mouth, that's kosher. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Abaya says, Kitnan nami masnisin. Our Mishnah also, that's what it's talking about. Shelo b'makom hanachas petanan. It's talking about that it was plated with gold in the area where the person was not placing his mouth, and that's why it was okay. And Rashi over here explains, b'makom hanachas pet pasul. Again, if the gold is in the area where the mouth is placed, it's pasul. Shatkiya b'zav v'lo b'shofar, because then already it's considered that tkiya is coming from the gold and not from the shofar. The Gemara continues at the two dots, quoting the Mishnah, Shtei chatzotzrots min hastadim. They had at the sides of the shofar in the Beis HaMikdash two trumpets. So the Gemara asks, Utrei koli mi mishtami. Can you really hear two sounds at once? Can you really be yotzei if you're hearing both the shofar and the chatzotzros? The Gemara says, Vatanya, but we learned in a brayso, Zachar v'Shamar b'dibor echad nemru. When it came to the Aseres Hadibros, Zachar and Shamar were said at the same moment. Masha'in hapeh yechol ledaber, ve'ino ozon yechol lishmoa. It's impossible normally for a mouth to say two things at once. It's impossible to hear two things at once. Yet by the Aseres Hadibros, Zachar and Shamar, by Zachar's Yom HaShabbos l'kadsho and Shamar's Yom HaShabbos, the Zachar and Shamar were said at the same moment. And so the Gemara answers, no, l'kach ma'arich b'shofar. That's why the shofar, it said in the Mishnah, they extended the sound of the shofar. So there was moments where the shofar was making sound without the trumpets alongside it. But the Gemara says, still it's a problem. L'meimra d'chishama sof tkiya, below tchilas tkiya yotza. Does that mean to say that if a person hears the end of the tkiya, not the beginning of the tkiya, he's yotzei? Umemela, and from there we would learn as well, tchilas tkiya, below sof tkiya yotza, that also, let's say you hear the beginning of the tkiya, but you don't hear the end of the tkiya, you're yotzei, because we're saying right now that at the moment that the trumpets were blowing, you're not really yotzei that part. You're not really hearing the shofar. You're only hearing when it's extended. You're only hearing the time when the shofar alone is blowing. So are you yotzei without hearing the entire blast? Gemara says, Tashma, come and hear a proof. Taka barishon. It says as follows. Let's say a person does a tkiya in the beginning of the set, umashach b'shniya, and then at the end of the set, so normally you have tkiya, trua tkiya, so the first tkiya, he does a regular normal tkiya, and then in the second tkiya at the end, so he does a long one, he wants it to count for the last tkiya of the first group, and he also wants it to count for the first tkiya of the second group, umashach b'shniya kishtayim. Again, in that last tkiya, he draws it out so it's as long as two tekiyas. Ein biyado alachas, it only counts as one tekiya. You can't draw out a very long tekiya and say that it's going to count for the final tekiya of the first set and count for the first tekiya of the second set. And so the Gemara asks, Amai, why is that the case? Tesalik lebetarti. If you're saying that you only have to hear the end or the beginning of a tekiya, so then do a long tekiya, and it should count for the end of the first set and the beginning of the second set. And so to that, the Gemara says, no, psuke tekiyasa mehadadi lo paskinan. The problem over there is a different problem. It's not true. Of course it's true that you only have to hear the beginning or the end of the tekiya. That is true. But to divide one tekiya in half, that it should count for two, that already is impossible. Gemara says, Tashma, come in here. Another proof. It says, let's say somebody blows the tkiya into a pit or into a cistern or into some kind of a jug, some kind of a hollow area. He's blowing, so it creates an echo. So it says, in kol shofar shama yotza. If what you're hearing is the sound of the shofar, so then you're yotzei the mitzvah of shofar. V'im kol havara shama, but if what you're hearing is the sound of the echo, lo yotza. So in that situation, you're not going to be yotzei. You're not hearing the shofar itself, you're hearing the echo. And so the Gemara says, Amai, why is that the case? Again, if you only have to hear part of the tekiya, so leipuk b'tchilas tekiya mekami dele'arviv kala. Just be yotzei when you first hear the tekiya before you start mixing it up with the echo. For that first moment, you're only hearing the tekiya. You should be yotzei with that. And so the Gemara says, you're right. Elatarti kali mechad gavra lo mishtami. All the brayso meant above by Zachar v'Shamar is you can't hear two voices or two sounds from one individual. But mitrei gavri mishtami, but from two different individuals, like in this case, you have a shofar blowing from one person, a trumpet from the other. So there it actually is possible to distinguish the sounds. It's no problem at all that the chatzotzros are blowing together with the shofar. But the Gemara still says, "Umitre gavri mi mishtami." Is it really true that you can distinguish when you have two sounds coming from one person, from two people? Vatanya, but we learned in a brisa, b'Torah echad korev echad mitargim. It says that when you're laning from the Torah, you have one person who reads the psukim, and you have another person who does the translation. Uvilvad shlo yishnayim koren ushnayim mitargimin. But you can't have two people reading. You can't have two people doing the translation. In other words, you can't really hear it properly if you have two people reading at once. And so the Gemara says, no, halodam yellow l'seifa. Our case of shofar, you're correct. When you're laning or reading from the Torah, there is a problem. But our case of shofar is actually more similar to the end of that brisa. It says over there, b'halal uva Megillah. It says when we're talking about halal, or when we're talking about the laning of the Megillah, afilu asara koren, even with 10 people reading, it's still okay. A person can still distinguish and hear properly. And what's the reasoning? The Gemara says, Alma, you see, kevan dechaviv, when something is beloved, yoev daite, a person is able to pay attention. Hachanami, here also when it comes to shofar, kevan dechaviv, since the blowing of the shofar is beloved, yoev daite, the person will be able to pay attention, v'shama, and will be able to hear it. And so the Gemara says, okay, so we know now that you're able to hear the sound of the shofar, even when the trumpets are blowing together. So the Gemara says, Elalama ma'arich b'shofar. If that's the case, why do you have to extend the sound of the shofar? You shouldn't even need to extend it. You can hear the shofar just fine, while the chatzotzros are also making their sound. To that the Gemara says, Leidash mitzvahs hayom b'shofar. You're right. The only reason we're extending the sound of the shofar is just to let people know that the real mitzvah of the day is with the shofar. The Gemara continues at the two dots, quoting the Mishnah, Vatanios b'shel zechorim kefufin upiv mitzupa kesef. It said that on public fast days, they would use a ram's horn that was bent, and the shofar was plated with silver. So the Gemara says, Ma'ishna hasam dezav, u'ma'ishna hachad kesef. How come over there on Rosh Hashanah we played it with gold, and over here on the public fast days it's with silver? So the Gemara says, if you want, I could say the following answer. Kol kinufya de kesef, or anytime you're blowing something to gather the people, you always use silver. T'chsiv, like the pasuk says, Aseh lecha shtei chatzotzros kesef, it says, make for yourself 2 trumpets of silver, and again, that was also for the purpose of gathering the people. V'boy same, and the Gemara says, if you want, I could say another answer. HaTorah chasa al mamon and shel Yisrael. The Torah doesn't want the Klal Yisrael to have to spend so much money. Silver is not as expensive as gold, and therefore they use silver. So the Gemara says, what kind of answer is that? Hasam nami navid de kesef. If that's the case, they're also on Rosh Hashanah. We should plate it with silver, not with gold, because we don't want that people should have to spend so much money. So to that, the Gemara says, afilu hachi kavod yontiv. If nevertheless, in this case, when it's Rosh Hashanah, we want to honor the yontiv, that's more important. So therefore, on Rosh Hashanah, we use gold, but during the public fast days, we use silver. Gemara continues, Rav Papa bar Shmuel savar lemevar uvda kamas nisan. Rav Papa bar Shmuel thought that he would have the shofar outside of the Beis HaMikdash the same way as in the Beis HaMikdash, as in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah it said he had shofar, he had chatzotzros together. He wanted to do the same thing outside the Beis HaMikdash. Amar le Rava, so Rava said to him, Lo amru ela b'mikdash. No, the halach in our Mishnah is only in the Beis HaMikdash, not outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara says, Tanya nami hachi, we have a brisa like this as well, B'med devar mamurim b'mikdash. All of these halachas are true in the Beis HaMikdash, aval b'gvulin, but when it comes to outside the Beis HaMikdash, makom sheyesh chatzotzros ein shofar, in an area, meaning by a public fast where you're using chatzotzros, there you would not use the shofar. Makom sheyesh shofar ein chatzotzros. If you're using the shofar like on Rosh Hashanah, you're not going to use the chatzotzros. And the Gemara says, V'chein hinig Rabbi Chalafta b'tzipori v'Rabbi Chananya ben Tradion b'sichni. Rabbi Chalafta and Tzipori and Rabbi Chananya ben Tradion and Sichni, they also tried to do like our Mishnah says, like you're supposed to do only in the Beis HaMikdash. And when it came, the news came to the Chachamim about this, Amru, they said, Lo hayu noagin kein ella b'shari mizrach uv harabayis bilvad. Again, the custom in our Mishnah that was only done by the eastern gate, by the harabayis, meaning it was only done in the Beis HaMikdash, it was not done outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava v'Teimer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rava, and some people say Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, says, Mikra, what is the pasuk that indicates this idea that only in the Beis HaMikdash you should add the chatzotzros? Because the pasuk says, B'chatzotzros v'kol shofar, hariu lefnei HaMelech Hashem. It says you should blow the trua with trumpets and shofar in front of Hashem. Lefnei HaMelech Hashem, hu davin and chatzotzros v'kol shofar. Only when you're in front of the King Hashem, then we say you need chatzotzros and kol shofar, meaning only in the Beis HaMikdash a person is supposed to blow in both the chatzotzros and the shofar. Aval bi'almalo, but again, outside of the Beis HaMikdash, we do not use the chatzotzros, we only blow the shofar. Gemara continues at the two dots, quoting the Mishnah, Shaveh hayovel Rosh Hashana l'tkiyah v'lebrachas v'chulu. It said that Yovel, on the Yom Kippur of Yovel, it was the same as Rosh Hashanah for tkiyah, and also for the brachas, meaning the brachas and the Amidah were identical as they were in Rosh Hashanah. The brachas that you do by Yovel were identical. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak says, Keman matzlinan ha'idna. Nowadays, who do we follow when we daven? We say the following line in davening on Rosh Hashanah. we say Zeh Hayom Tchilas Ma'asecha Zikaron L'Yom Rishon. This is the beginning of your creation, a remembrance of that first day. So, Keman, who does that follow? Rabbi Eliezer, that follows Rabbi Eliezer. Diyamar B'Tishrei Nivra Ha'olam, because Rabbi Eliezer says the world was created in Tishrei. So that's why we say in the davening on Rosh Hashanah, this is the day of creation. The day of creation was in Tishrei when the world was created. And so the Gemara asks from our Mishnah, Mesav Ravena asks, Shave Yovel Rosh Hashanah L'Tkiya V'Lebrachos. It said again that Yovel, the Yom Kippur of Yovel, was the same brachos that we say on Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara says, how could it be identical brachos? V'yika Zeh Yom Tchilas Ma'asecha Zikaron L'Yom Rishon. What about the line where we say on Rosh Hashanah, we say Zeh Yom Tchilas Ma'asecha, this is the beginning of creation. To be Rosh Hashanah Iso V'Yovel Esa, that's true on Rosh Hashanah, but it's not true on Yovel. So why would we say that line on Yovel? Why would the brachos of the Amida be identical? And to that the Gemara says, no, Kikatani Ashara. We mean to say it's identical in every other regard, but that line actually is taken out in the brachos of Yovel. And the Gemara continues, Rav Shisha Brei Ravidi Masnihachi. Rav Shisha Brei Ravidi learned it just slightly differently. Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak, that Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak said, Haditanan, Shava HaYovel Rosh Hashanah L'Tkiyo L'Brachos. That which we learned in our Mishnah, that on Yovel you say the same brachos as you say on Rosh Hashanah, Keman, Deloka Rabbi Eliezer. Who does that follow? It doesn't seem like Rabbi Eliezer. To Rabbi Eliezer, because if it was following Rabbi Eliezer, Kevan Damar B'Tishrei Nivra Olam, since he says that the world was created in Tishrei, Ha'ika Zeh Yom Tchilas Ma'asecha Zikaron L'Yom Rishon. You have the line of Zeh Yom Tchilas Ma'asecha. Again, this is the day of the beginning of your creation. To be Rosh Hashanah Isa V'Yovel Esa. That is true on Rosh Hashanah, and it's not true on Yovel, so it wouldn't be identical. So again, it seems to be that our Mishnah does not follow Rabbi Eliezer. And again, the Gemara gives the same answer, Kikatani Ashara. Again, when we say it's identical, we don't mean it's totally identical. We mean the rest of the bracha is identical, but that one line, even though it's said on Rosh Hashanah, would not be said when it comes to the Yovel. The Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Shofar Shenistak V'Divko Puzzle. Let's say a shofar that was cracked, and then you glued it together. That's going to be puzzle. Divek Shivrei Shofaris. Let's say you have a bunch of broken shofaris, and you glue them together to create a shofar. Puzzle. That's also going to be puzzle. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis.